amazing Australians and the story of their lives. You're tuned to Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald.
Hello and welcome, listeners. My guest today is Patricia Skehan, author, historian, speaker and founding executive member of Concord Heritage Society, now known as City of Canada Bay Heritage Society in Sydney. She travels across the country giving heritage talks. Patricia's latest book is called The Secret of Anzac Ridge in Flanders Fields and is out now. It's a wonderful insight into a young soldier, James Armitage's diaries. James fought in the trenches in World War I, and it's also an insight into General Sir John Monash's thinking and other soldiers. Welcome, Patricia, or can I call you Trish?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, Trish is fine.
Trish, you were born on Armistice Day, so tell us a little bit about that and where you were born and where you were brought up.
I was born in Camperdown at the hospital there. I've always had Armistice Day as a special day for me. And incidentally, my husband was born on the 15th of August, which is Victory in the Pacific Day. So we both share sort of unique heritage birthdays, so to speak. Grew up in Sydney and married my husband, who was an incremental Crown Sergeant of Police.
Oh, right.
In Concord for a long time, and that's when I became involved with Concord Heritage Society.
Yes.
So I had no idea of the great adventures I would be on in joining the Heritage Society, but my research has taken me halfway across the world. I've been over in England and in Europe in doing research as well. So as I said, it's been wonderful adventures.
You go to the University of Cambridge, I think, don't you, Trish?
I did. My mentor from Macquarie University was an adjunct professor there, and so he sent me off to Cambridge to do some special research on the Walkers of Uralla, which is an estate in Concord.
Right. Now, as I said in my introduction, the Concord Heritage Society is now known as the City of Canada Bay Heritage Society. How did that come about, Trish?
Well, we were Concord Heritage Society, and there were other societies around, such as Strathfield and Drummoyne, and then they closed down, and we were incorporating some of their people and their significant collections into our society. And of course, they wanted to have their names included, so we were looking at Strathmoyne and Concord, like combinations of the name, and nothing seemed to work. So then we decided to go apolitical and call it the City of Canada Bay, which encompasses a larger area around Concord.
Oh, right. So there is actually, I must admit, I spend a lot of time at school in Sydney. I'm up here in Brisbane now, but I was wondering where Canada Bay was.
Well, it is around the foreshores on the Parramatta River, and it's got quite a significant history because the exiles of Canada Bay were there in the 1840s,
All right.
The same time that the Walker Estate was being developed. And so the history is sort of side by side with Concord.
All right. Thank you for that. Now, Trish, being born, as you say, on Armistice Day, do you think that might have steered you towards the writing and research you do? I mean, you've published 7 books, I think, now on history of heritage subjects. It must take an enormous amount of research. Where on earth do you start? And we'll go back to the first one. Do you think being born on Armistice Day steered you in that direction?
I've never really thought of it that way. It was just one of those things that happened. But in joining Concord Heritage and then looking to write a small pamphlet on the anomalies on the story of Uralla itself, that grew into a 250-page book, A4 size. And then a second book came out of that after I was in Cambridge and finding the stories, and also being in London and having some correspondence with Her Majesty the Queen Mother about her days, because she was actually a distant cousin of Edith's. Through their paternal great-grandmother. So in finding out all these wonderful stories, they naturally had to go into a book. And then having 2 books for adults, we wanted to have something for children as well. So that led to a 3rd book, which is Where the Blue Wattle Grows, which is more a story of Edith when she was much younger, and she had a girl that was adopted to be raised as a companion with her. So those stories came out. and continuing on from there into the Canadian exiles, which is another one of my talks. And as I said, finding out all these different characters that have sort of evolved from the research.
And incredible. So for our listeners, Trish, Edith is Edith
Campbell Walker.
Right.
She was, as I said, related to Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the Queen Mother.
Yes.
And her father came from 6 kings and 22 baronets of the British throne, and from the going right back to Robert the Bruce on the Scottish side of the family. So It was quite incredible history.
It is.
Thomas was very much sort of a quiet achiever in a way. He didn't flaunt his royalty, whereas his brother, who came out after him a few years later, was telling everyone in sight that he was royal, and he talked his way into a royal tour going up through Papua New Guinea, and was actually captured and killed and eaten by cannibals up there. So he came to a very sticky end.
He certainly did. Absolutely. Trish, you said in 2013 that Ethel Turner's granddaughter asked you to transcribe letters from Jean Carlous to her famous mother, written while a volunteer nursing aide during the 1919 Spanish flu epidemic. Tell us about this and how you sourced rare archives from the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, the Red Cross Sydney University, and other sources, and how you were given the diary of the young World War I soldier, James Armitage.
Well, as I said, in not realising all the adventures I would become involved in, a lot of these things just occurred when I was doing the tours, and in finding Ethel Turner, whose daughter was one of the nurses on the site, was something that we hadn't realised before. And then having the granddaughter ask me during the tour, she was actually assigned to my group, and asked me if I had known about it and if I'd be interested in transcribing a lot of private letters that Jean had written to her mother. So naturally I jumped at the chance to do that. And so that led in some ways to several different books, because part of one of those letters was talking about a place called Steenwerk in Flanders, and I'd never heard of Steenwerk.
No.
So I was surprised at the story there, and then to have Jane, who's one of my teaching team, asked me during our lockdown in 2020 if I would like to read her uncle's diary, and then Steenwerk came out from that again. And so I had 2 different sources talking about this place I'd never heard of. And in doing the research, to then discover that it was actually Sir John Monash's secret headquarters, it was quite a revelation.
It certainly was, yes.
He said in his diary that it was the best place to hide a secret, out in the open. And when we looked at sort of where it was located compared to the position of all of the major battlefields, it was virtually right in the middle of this circle of famous battlefields. And they had this 2nd Australian Casualty Clearing Station there. And also Monash had commandeered a girl's chateau, well, her family chateau, for his private headquarters. So in this one of these letters that turned out to have been written over and was discovered over in Uralla was the fact that it was his secret headquarters, and that the girl, she was saying she had written to Monash, and we thought, how did she know where to write to Monash? But turned out in finding in his diary that it was actually her family's headquarters that he had commandeered. So she knew where to write to Monash just by writing home.
Oh, right. He was very well thought of, Monash, wasn't he? My husband and my brother were both in the army at Duntroon and Vietnam and whatever, and we were only talking about it over the weekend. And they both studied Monash at Duntroon, and they said that he was very highly regarded, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. And one of the things in Jim's diary was talking about the fact that we almost lost the name Anzac itself.
Yes.
Because of the loss at Gallipoli, our own government decided to abolish the name Anzac. And so Jim in his diary was talking about being there one night when there was a big meeting of both the Australian General Monash and also the New Zealand General, and that they split all the troops up and were going to become the first Australian corps for Australia and the first New Zealand corps for the New Zealanders. But there was such an outcry from the men because they had fought together for so long as Anzacs, and also from the families of those who had died as Anzacs, that the government had to change their thinking in the end and abolish the abolition so that we got to keep the name Anzac. So I found that a very interesting disturbing fact to learn, that we almost lost that name.
Wouldn't that have been a tragedy if we had?
Oh, absolutely.
It comes across in James Armitage's diary in your book, The Secret of Anzac Ridge, how young they were, what they thought they were going off to, Trish. I mean, did they really realise? They didn't, did they, what it was all entailing?
No, I think most of the young men in particular thought it was going to be a great adventure and a great way to see the world.
Yes.
But Jim was one of 6 boys who actually signed up on the same day, and 2 of their classmates had signed up a month before because they had already turned 18. And so it was amazing that given the odds of 1 in 4 dying, that all 8 boys actually returned from the war. But Jim's diary talks about the 6 main ones that were his classmates, and how all the adventures that they had, because it wasn't just a matter of being there in front of the guns. They had time away from the battlefields, and they were up to all sorts of adventures and escapades. And so it was wonderful to read his diary. Initially, I thought, I wasn't thinking it was going to be very much, but I was amazed in reading through it that his wording was as good as any of the war correspondents of the time.
They were. Absolutely. I totally agree with you. He was a very good writer.
He was.
Yes.
The thing was that he was revealing a number of secrets that shouldn't have been revealed. And so, for example, there was no bridges across the Somme, and yet he was talking about the men meeting at Circular Quay, which most people would presume was talking about Sydney.
Yes.
But Monash had decided to get his pioneers, his special group of engineers, to make a Lego-type bridge that could be taken out of this building, which had Circular Quay on the name, because Jim actually had a photograph of it in his diary. Oh. And so this bridge was taken out at night and put across the river, and had to be taken apart again before dawn so that the Germans wouldn't be able to see it and bomb it. But they couldn't just have everybody turning up all at once, so people had to be given specific times to gather there if they wanted to get across either way. And so this meeting at Circular Quay became a sort of well-known secret with the men themselves. So if a German or a spy or someone was hearing it, they would naturally think we were talking about Circular Quay in Sydney.
It's an incredible insight, which you very cleverly have brought to us. But Trish, look, I've got to tell this story because I just laughed when I read it in your book, about a pompous British officer asking General Birdwood why Australian soldiers were not saluting their senior officers. Birdwood told the story of how, when doing the rounds of the trenches, a big burly Queenslander was doing sentry duty, who barely gave him a glance as he passed by, until the soldier saw a shell coming and yelled, "Duck your bloody head, Birdie," using the nickname that the soldiers gave him. The British officer asked what on earth General Birdwood had asked him what on earth he had done. Did he court-martial the soldier for swearing and calling him Birdie? "Gosh, no," the general said. "Why, I did exactly what he said and ducked my bloody head." I think that's a lovely story.
Otherwise he wouldn't have had a head to duck.
Yeah, I think it's a lovely, lovely story. And being an army officer's wife for many, many years, I think it really tickled my fancy. But Trish, now the diary entries, of course, are not all, laughter and joy and whatever. There's a lot of tragedy. And having just had Remembrance Day here, it's very timely that I'm talking to you.
Yes, and one of the things that Jim mentioned was a commando passing him in the night. And that was all that he said about it. But it stayed with me for a long time in trying to find out who this commando was. And so many avenues of inquiry just led to dead ends, because I didn't know the nationality and the name of this particular commando. And so it was amazing, one of those coincidences that I found has been happening so much through the researching, that I was in a totally different project in the 1960s timeframe. And when I came across a reference to what was called the Ghost of the Western Snows, and on clicking on that information and reading it, I found it was actually the commando himself who had been talking about his life story, because he had such a great time as a commando in the First World War, but he was very seriously injured. And in the Second World War, because of his injuries, he was just given a desk job. So the difference between having all the adrenaline of being a commando and then just being, as he said, a pencil pusher behind the scenes, he decided to write his whole memoirs.
Right.
And unfortunately, he committed suicide. And so the diaries were published in the paper about 3 days later, but it had the whole story of who he was. So finally having a name, I looked for where he had been buried.
Yes.
Only to find from the war graves that for the 2 years that I was teaching at Womble School and looking for him, I was driving past his grave within a few hundred metres, because the graveyard opposite the school at Womble there is where he was buried. So it was one of those amazing coincidences.
Absolutely. Incredible, actually. Now, you're listening to Lots to Chat About. I'm Rosemary Peterswald, and my guest today is historian and author Patricia Skehan. Now, Trish, there are so many to be honoured in your book: the diggers, the nurses, the nuns in the villages, the orphan children, and then, of course, the horses, which so many of us forget about. But they were such an integral part of the war, and so many of them were injured. And then what to do with them at the end of the war? Many of the soldiers, had sort of become so attached to them.
That was one of Jim's special tasks, because he was so fluent in French, in able to read and write it, that he was tasked with selling off all of the war horses from his artillery division. And so he was able to smuggle a few of them across to England, including his own ones that he had during the war. But most of the horses couldn't be brought back. There were just so many of them.
Yes.
But one of the interesting things was finding out that with the vets who used to look after the horses, they would initially send the horses anywhere once they were willing or ready to go back to service.
Yes.
They'd send them here, there, or anywhere. And the horses were used to being part of a team and of having special handlers. So they would often break away from where they'd been sent and try to find their, to go back to where they had previously been. So they decided in the end the best way to handle this situation was, when the horses were sent to the vets, they had to paint on their rumps where they came from, which division and who owned them, so that way they could then try and get them back to their former owners.
Oh, right. That's that's a terrific. I hadn't actually taken that in, but that is a terrific thing. But Trish, soldiers trying to recover after the war, and bad enough as it is, but then they were hit by the Spanish flu pandemic.
Yes,
so much worse than COVID, wasn't it?
Yes, that killed off more people, actually, the Spanish flu, than the ones who had died in the war. And interestingly, Jim got the Spanish flu, and he and a couple of the boys with him were actually billeted with an old lady out in the country, and she went into the fields and got specific herbs and treated them, and they recovered. And yet some of the other men from his division who were there at the time and were sent to hospital all died. And so the government decided, there must have been something special about Jim. So after the war, when he was over in England, they actually used him as a guinea pig and trialled a number of injections on Jim.
Did we ever discover why or how he spoke French?
No, he'd obviously taken that as a class at school. He was at Sydney Grammar School,
Yes.
and he was the dux of the class, and that's why the boys were waiting for him to turn 18, and then they all signed up on his birthday.
Oh,
But
right. Yes.
although Jim, because he was young and he didn't have any sort of love interest in the diary, he actually, after the war, he married a lady called Lurline, and they unfortunately couldn't have any children. So Jane, who was my teaching friend who gave me the diary, her children became sort of his surrogate family. And so we got some lovely photographs of them. Jim lived to be 100 years of age.
I
And
saw
on his
that.
100th birthday, the French Consul General in Australia came up to Kincumber village where he lived and presented him with the Chevalier Medal of Honour. And Jim quipped, "Mate, you're about 80 years too late."
He sounds
But
as
one
though
of the
he
stories
was a character.
he was. One of the stories I'd love to tell you is actually a love story that I found in the book.
Yes.
And at this second Australian casualty clearing station, which was in Steenwork, there was a soldier called Paddy Noonan, and he fell madly in love with one of the nurses called Colleen. And this was in 1916, and he was very badly injured, and she didn't know if he'd live or not. So she just sort of kidded him along for a while. But they put him on a train one night to send him to England to be operated on. And she said she went up to the train and gave him a slip of paper which only had 5 words on it because he kept proposing. And so this slip of paper said, "If we ever meet again." And this was 1916, and we knew the war would still go on for several years.
Yes.
So poor Paddy went to England. He was operated on, but he was so ill that they sent him home. They repatriated him to New Zealand. And so for the next 2 years, he worked his guts out to get fit again. And in about June of 1918, he signed up for a second time and got on a ship and went to England. And he arrived in England on Armistice Day and was told, "Mate, you're not going back to Flanders. You're just going to be sent back home." So he was devastated because what he'd worked for all that time in trying to get back to Flanders to see if he could find Colleen was sort of, it had all faded away. So he was very depressed, and they told him, "You can have a week's leave and then you need to go to Liverpool, where there's a ship called the SS Tahiti, which is taking a lot of New Zealand wounded back home, and you can go on that ship." Now, however, there was a nurse up there, and she remembered this young soldier from years back who told her what a wonderful place Taranaki in New Zealand was. And so she decided she'd get on the ship and go with the soldiers. So for the first week, she was downstairs in the hospital and poor Paddy was upstairs, but he became such a basket case that they sent him to the hospital. And who should be the nurse assigned to him but his Colleen?
Oh.
And so when she saw him, she was overjoyed, and he took that piece of paper that he'd carried in his wallet all that time, which had those 5 words, "If we ever meet again." And he showed her the piece of paper and she said, "Yes, Paddy." So when they got to Taranaki, they were actually married and they had 2 sons and a daughter. And I found in researching later on, in looking through the white pages of New Zealand, that in Taranaki there was a P. Noonan in that place.
Right.
I wrote there, but unfortunately I didn't get any answer. But I would love to get some sort of, like a photograph of their wedding or something like that. So I'm writing to all the Noonan families that are still listed in, they're all down on the South Island, but hopefully some of them will be related to this wonderful love story.
Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful, Trish, if you could get hold of that? Gosh, I can see another whole book coming out of there. But Anzac,
a lot of people have said they want to see the movie of it.
Yeah. Actually, that would be terrific. I mean, Anzac Day has become huge around Australia, and it's absolutely wonderful to see the young ones so involved now, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And interestingly, there are 2 specific songs that became known as sort of the soldier songs, one being Tipperary and the other one being Mademoiselle from Armentières. Now, there was a minister who actually wrote a book called Tipperary when he came back to Australia. And when we do our talks on the book, I do a little reading from that, which just explains what it meant. So if you have a moment, It was at an estaminet, one of those wayside inns, which since the coming of Tommy, the British soldiers at any rate, are always found with an open door and a cosy hearth. There is champagne at 5 francs, the ever-present vin rouge and vin blanc at 1.5 francs per bottle, and the sharp homemade beer of France at 1 penny per glass, always on sale, and also eggs, always eggs. As I entered, I heard Tipperary. Someone had started singing it in French, breaking off halfway to tackle his plate of eggs. Madame, a refugee from Lille, looked up from tending to the stove and demanded with sudden interest, "This Tipperary, is it far? Is it that you live there also, you Australians? I know it is the home of the English, but why do you call it your home?" I explained to her that not only the English, but the Australians, the Irish, the Scottish, the Canadians, and the South Africans all sang it. "Then it is more than a little village in Ireland," she said. "It is your chez vous, n'est-ce pas? The home of everyone, as well as the big family hearth of all of the soldiers of l'Empire Britannique." "Yes," I assured her, "something like that." "My Tipperary," she said, "it is at Lille." She told us of the little cottage outside of the town with its roof of mossy tiles, of the lilac drooping from the eaves and the pretty hedge of hawthorn and briar rose that encircled the garden. She asked again, "Is it very, very far to Tipperary, monsieur?" In reply, we drank to the big push that we had been expecting day by day. As we rose to go, we smiled and said, "It's not far now, madame."
Isn't that one? I was actually born in Tipperary.
Really?
I was.
What another coincidence.
Yes, I came out to Australia from Tipperary in 1954. But I go back often and very much part of my life. But Trish, I mean, you really have had a wonderful, wonderful input into our understanding of the Anzacs, of heritage, and your book, I think, is an absolute credit to you. I just loved it. And again, for our listeners, it is called The Secret of Anzac Ridge in Flanders Fields. Now, it's available bookshops pretty much all around, isn't it, Trish?
Yes, if there's any left. I received a royalty check the other day and I was told that of the print run, there's only about 370 books left.
Wow.
So wondering if they're going to do a second edition. I'll have to check up with my agent on that.
And you can buy it online. I actually I got mine on Kindle, and it's not on audio at this stage, Trish?
No, but they are looking at doing that.
Oh, that would be terrific because a number of our listeners are sight impaired, although many are not. But that would be absolutely fantastic. But thank you, Patricia Skehan, for being my guest today. And thank you, Paul,
my pleasure,
for producing.
Thank you.
This program has been recorded in the studios of 4RPH Reading Radio in Brisbane for syndication around Australia. It will also be available on my YouTube channel, Lots to Chat About, with Rosemary Peterswald. But don't forget the book that Patricia has written and is out and available. It sounds as though there's still a few available anyway, is The Secret of Anzac Ridge in Flanders Fields. But it is a wonderful book. I highly recommend you read it. And thank you again, Patricia Skehan, for being my guest.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Great friends and great chats. That was another Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald. Stay tuned next week for another amazing chat.